Welcome to Mystery Monday number 12, The Return of the Stolen Paintings. 5 years of legal wrangling over the estate of the late Miss Frida B. Ogden had almost been resolved when four extremely valuable paintings were stolen from her private gallery. The late Miss Ogden had been a devotee, not to mention a considerable expert, on the Italian Renaissance. She had also been an ardent feminist, a publicly declared spinster, and the last in the direct line of the Ogdens, whose fortune had been amassing without pause since the War of 1812. A perceptive ancestor with a head for chemistry and a nose for marketing had determined the public's desire for a mild blend of whiskey that warmed the stomach without simultaneously blinding the eyes. The result was wealth that, by the turn of the century, was literally beyond counting. Frida B. Ogden had managed the distilleries, extended the art collection, and stamped on opposing points of view with rigor matched only by the original Ogden himself. When she died 5 years ago, the distillery business was healthier than it had ever been. All the other enterprises had doubled in value, and, through some exceptionally judicious trading and buying, she had elevated the family's collection of Renaissance paintings to a level that was matched only by a very few international galleries. The estate was in the hands of Monopoly Trust Incorporated, and was about to be dispersed among 23 squabbling second cousins when the paintings disappeared. Monopoly Trust's agent, Wendy Pickle, who, to her considerable surprise, had been dealing quite amicably with 23 different lawyers, and suddenly found herself in an impossible imbroglio over the theft. In fact, she was slowly becoming convinced that the Ogden estate would never be settled until long after her own was forgotten. Then, as the case were compounding itself with complete reverses, the paintings turned up again. Only 2 weeks ago, an anonymous telephone call had led to the RCMP to an unused barn not far from the Ogden mink ranches in northern Alberta. No one was more relieved at their discovery than Wendy. The first thing she had done was to inspect the paintings herself at the RCMP office in Edmonton. As soon as they arrived, Wendy had noted how carefully the thieves had crated and preserved them. Someone, she had remarked, had shown as much care as Frida B. Ogden would have done. A good thing, for these were priceless works. Two of the pieces, in fact, were not paintings at all, but sketches, one attributed to Donatello, a preliminary musing for his statue of David. Another was a wonderfully fleshy set of nudes in a pastoral scene by Giotto. The latter was especially valuable because the painting, which had eventually followed the sketch, had been lost for several hundred years. The third was an anonymous early 14th century Garden of Eden scene with Adam, Eve, God the Father, and an incredibly long snake, all gathered together in mild surprise under an apple tree. Its considerable value was due to its age and uniqueness, rather than in any artistic or innovative quality. Giorgione's Rit Chichepere was fourth, and perhaps the most valuable. It was not even a part of the Ogden collection, but was on exchange from the Louvre at the time of the theft. Wendy's relief at their undamaged condition was rather sharply modified when she was finally able to take a closer look. Someone with a reasonable degree of artistic ability had drawn very tiny but quite discernible raisins in the navel of every nude body in all four pieces. The shy maiden in the Giorgione had a lumped cluster of them in hers. Adam and Eve sported very small black ones, and on the Donatello, David, the artist, had arranged them in a small circle. Vandalism? Perhaps. Mischief? Possibly. A deliberate devaluing of the paintings? A red herring? It was almost certain that the anonymous telephone call to the RCMP about the unused barn had come from someone associated with the Raisins. Whatever the motive, Monopoly Trust had been forced to bring in yet another consultant to the Ogden case, causing even further delay. Nothing regarding the disposition of the estate would even be contemplated until an authority had decided whether the paintings could be restored or repaired, or whether they had lost value. It was this authority in the person of one Mark Dexel that Wendy had been patiently waiting all morning. As he hunkered before the artworks in the RCMP storage room in Edmonton, Dexel had clumped in carrying 2 briefcases, a small one from which he emptied several magnifying glasses, some small brushes, an assortment of clothes, 2 flashlights, and a single white glove. The large case, Wendy had to look several times to be sure, was filled with bags of potato chips. "I don't like the feel of them on my hands," Dexel said, nodding at the chips as he put on the white glove. And that had been the extent of his remarks to her. The rest of the time he had spent talking to the paintings and eating the chips with his gloved hand. Wendy caught the pieces of the monologue from where he sat. "Raisins, no imagination. Never did like the green ones. Soluble. Beautiful work. Giotto. Okay. Should be." Through the past 2 hours and 7 bags of potato chips, Dexel had peered at, brushed, touched with his finger, sniffed, and talked to every navel in the collection. Finally, after what Wendy thought was a somewhat overlook and lascivious stare at the Giotto nudes, Dexel stretched and yawned, came over to where she sat, and began to repack his equipment in the smaller case. Very carefully, he pressed the empty chip bags flat and laid them in as well. 11 of these, and you get a free hamburger," he said to her, very conscious of the importance of this advice. "I can usually get up to 2 hamburgers by Saturday. Sometimes 3. You can get hot dogs, too, but not me. Do you know what goes into wieners? The paintings are okay. No trouble getting the ink off. It's water soluble. Took me a while to realize it. I expected more real damage. I'll do it this afternoon, if you like. I could do it right away, but I've got a euchre game. Beautiful work. The paintings, I mean. Even the fake Garden of Eden. Nothing like the Renaissance for nudes. Can't understand it, though. It seems so silly." Wendy Pickle's emotions struggled with shock, relief, and developing awareness. She jumped to her feet. "Of course it's fake. The Garden of Eden. I should have seen that right away." She felt out of breath. "That explains the raisins, too. And the tip-off. The thief has still got the real one." She sat down and put her head in her hands. Dexel, meanwhile, put his glove back on and opened the one remaining bag of chips. "I'm going to be on the Ogden estate forever," Wendy moaned softly. Mark Dexel was the expert, but even so, he assumed that Wendy would know the anonymous Garden of Eden was fake. Why? And why does Wendy say that the fake Garden of Eden explains the raisins and the tip-off? So we have here a bit of a 2-part question. We'll talk about a few things here as the video continues in just a moment. So there are 2 things that seem necessary to discuss for background and for context when it comes to this story. The first is the reference to the red herring questioned by Wendy Pickle as she's trying to figure out exactly what's with these paintings and how they've been returned. A red herring is as much a debate tactic as it is a logical fallacy. We're focusing on the logical fallacy side here. It is a fallacy of distraction and is committed when a listener attempts to divert an arguer from his argument by introducing another topic. So trying to distract the person, in this case Wendy Pickle, with other things, and you have to decide if that's important or not. And the second bit of information that seems necessary, because again it was so long ago, we're talking about a Renaissance period, is kind of the understanding of Adam and Eve in this Garden of Eden painting that they've discussed, or that they've discovered. And so here's kind of little bit of background, a bit of an answer. It says, while it may seem like a trivial question, artists and theologians have been debating the appearance of Adam and Eve's midriffs for centuries. Some theologians claim that Adam and Eve did not have navels, since they were not born of a woman. Others argue that since Adam and Eve were the perfect models of humankind, God would not have created them with navels. Most artists, especially after the Renaissance, choose to depict Adam and Eve with navels because they looked unnatural without them. But a few painters, including 16th century Dutch artist Jan van Scorel, in his Adam and Eve in Paradise, selected the former interpretation and depicted the biblical pair as smooth stomach progenitors. And so given some of that information, we're back at the worksheet here and we have some questions. First, what inferences can you make about the potato chips and Drexel's peculiarity around them? Is there any peculiarity around them? Does it matter? They seem to be prominent in this story. Number 2, how do the raisins factor in the solutions? Write what you know. Number 3, there's always a cue for readers that acts as a turning point in the story. What is it here? And then finally, this is the old question. Let me go pull that. The questions here for the final solution are twofold. First is, Mark Drexel was not an expert, but even so, he assumed that Wendy would know the anonymous Garden of Eden was a fake. Why? And secondly, why does Wendy say that the fake Garden of Eden explains the raisins and the tip-off? Once you've been able to answer these questions and do the vocab, you have earned your Monday unit. As we end every video, ciao for now.